And about 70% of our school budgets at the local level come from the state based on enrollment formulas. So if you're down in enrollment, you're in financial distress in some way, it's certainly hit the Puget Sound much harder.
Well, that's the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Washington, Chris Rakedahl, right there, talking to me on Seattle Channel a few months ago about the financial state of our schools. Some serious challenges for K-12 education ahead, especially in Seattle. How will school districts deal with those challenges? How real is the possibility of consolidating or closing schools? And beyond that, what are the latest numbers saying about the state of childcare and early learning in the state of Washington? Plus, a huge issue underpinning all of these questions: how is U.S. tax law pushing families of color into poverty? Some very deep topics to take on this weekend in a Patrons First podcast. Very excited to have you with us once again here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own, and I'm here with special guest Stefan Blandford. He is a former Seattle School Board member, a friend of the podcast, I should say, and now executive director of the Children's Alliance, which advocates for kids statewide with a special focus on racial justice. Stefan, good to see you again. How you doing?
It's good seeing you too, Brian.
We're going to get into a few different issues here. I appreciate you rolling with me on this one. Thank you, sir. Thanks also to our show's background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons, this Patrons First podcast, a special treat just for you. Thanks to Steve for jumping on board last week. Just sent him his very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker. Stefan, you play your cards right. I might mail one of these to you as well. And you can get yours too, folks, if you jump in at the $5 level. Also, send in an action photo of your sticker on a coffee cup or a blackboard or whatever you want to do. We'll feature it on the video version of our program on Converge Media. Converge airs the podcast Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get rolling with right here, right now. Well, Stefan, we've all seen the headlines over the past couple of months. Schools slashing their budgets, Seattle schools dealing with a financial crisis, as it's been called. When I talked with State Superintendent Rakedahl and Seattle Superintendent Dr. Brent Jones just about a month or so ago, the basic idea was that COVID caused a lot of problems for our schools. I think we can agree with that. Many families actually kept younger students out of the school system, didn't even enroll them. Falling enrollment, not the case for all districts across the state, but it's a general theme. Puget Sound area schools especially dealing with this issue, and lower enrollments equal a lower amount of dollars from the state in terms of a funding model that Washington uses, which brings us to this place of talking about consolidating schools, closing schools, etc. Does that about sum it up in your mind? What did I miss in terms of how we got to where we are right now with our schools?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. Everything is driven by enrollment. If you don't have sufficient enrollment, and particularly as a result of the pandemic, lots of families have moved out of the city, and as a result, there's less revenue. I think the one thing that you might have missed that is important is there was a teacher strike last year, and that had some impacts because the teachers command a higher salary overall, and so there's less money going to fewer teachers, which in some ways is a good thing because you have fewer students. But ultimately, if teachers are getting paid more, then you're going to have this challenge. It's going to be exacerbated as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, I want teachers to be paid fairly. I know you do too, but that's a big part of it. These dollars that go out there for basic education, there's a limited amount of them. And I guess I should point out, Stefan, the Seattle School District has not made any decisions to consolidate or close schools just yet. It does have this plan in place to cut 90 central office staff this fall. It's also leaning on rainy day funds quite a bit to get through this next school year. But 2024 and 25 is where I'm really concerned. This could all really hit home. The Seattle Times reporting on this. $53.4 million in budget shortfalls are still projected for that year for Seattle schools. Right. That's the point where SPS could consider closing some of its 106 schools to the tune of about $28 million here. There's discussions going on right now about those possible closures. We could hear some more from SPS about these plans this October. That's what I'm hearing. And I guess we're not there yet, Stefan, but I did want to talk about this idea of potentially consolidating or closing schools. That's a major challenge. That's a big deal for SPS.
Yeah, it makes me glad that I'm no longer a school board director.
Right, that's a big decision.
There's some people that believe it's the hardest thing that school board directors have to do is close schools, because it is fraught with a lot of anger and frustration, and no matter how much communication you provide to families, there are families that are going to be on the losing end of that. And if not done well, it can particularly impact low-income families and families of color. So my hope is that the school system can avoid that option,
Yeah.
though it may actually be coming to pass pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've heard Dr. Jones talk about it a lot, Stefan, this idea of focusing on the quality of education. I know everyone gets stuck on a building or whatever else, but when you talk about, okay, we could potentially combine this program that's really great over here with this one and try to serve students in that way. With that goal of serving students, I definitely hear him saying some of the right things, but I think that's where the challenge is really going to come in. How do you continue to have a high quality of education for students in Seattle, and yet there might not be as many buildings to do it? I guess that's what I keep trying to wrap my head around.
Yeah, and it's someone who has watched it. While I was on the school board, our enrollments actually climbed a little bit, so we didn't have the challenge of closing schools. But I watched for many years when the prior boards had to deal with school closures.
2008, 2009, around there. I remember that, yeah.
And as much as you're focused on the quality of schools and trying to make sure that the quality doesn't suffer, when parent X or parent Y realizes that the school that they went to, that they wanted their children to go to, all of a sudden is going to be on the closure list, you see almost fist fights break out. I saw two people getting into it at a school board meeting about the closure of schools. And so it's fraught with a lot of energy and emotion.
Yeah, always. And I guess the part that I find really challenging about this, Stefan, is the funding model the state put in place back in 2017, 2018, the so-called solution to the McCleary mandate from the Supreme Court to amply fund public education. It just feels like here we go again. We've got local districts like Seattle still using levies to pay for basic education, pay for special education, which the state should be paying for. And I know I was talking about this with you when you were on the Seattle School Board 8 some odd years ago. Has our school funding model truly been fixed? And I know that's a huge question. It just doesn't feel like it to me.
No, it is not fixed. I think a lot of the investments that were made in special education are a response to a crisis around special education.
Sure.
But, you have a city like Seattle that is willing to tax itself, and you have other property poor districts across the state that can't afford to tax themselves. And so you have different qualities of education as a result. And until we have the public will that says education is the most important thing that we do in this state and we will tax ourselves appropriately, we'll never get to a solution to the problem that you raised.
Yeah, I guess I know that the state has made some big investments, though. I know there were investments made in early childcare. There were investments made in school during this legislative session, which I know is something you watch very closely here. But still, those dollars invested don't seem like they're keeping up to it, I guess, is where I come down on that.
Yeah, and I think you're right on that. And it's really seductive to think about things like, well, we'll just cut more central office staff because central office staff is not, they're for the average person, they're not going to see the connection between central office staff and what happens in the classroom. That said, we consistently have been under staffed as far as central office is concerned. When you look at the great city schools kind of metrics that take the number of students and divide it by the number of central office staff, Seattle Public Schools is usually pretty low on that list. And so that has implications for our, nation-leading opportunity gaps.
Right,
the way that those close is because you train teachers. That requires central office staff. And so you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul if you are trying to reconcile those two things.
Thank you for helping us with that. And I just wanted to keep going down that path. Central office staff, who is that? What kind of personnel are we talking about?
Well, back in the day, it was me. I was in central office staff way back.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, you got it from both sides. All right.
Yeah, but it is in many cases it's people who train teachers, people who supervise the principals of your local school, people who manage the budgets, and sometimes you have someone who is actually interfacing with the state legislature. So there are a number of different positions. There's 6,000 employees in Seattle Public Schools, and I don't know what the percentage is, but some of them are central office people.
Yeah. Boy, that's It's really interesting to talk about these issues, and I really appreciate your perspective on this, Stefan. And I did want to talk about it at a larger level, at that state level here, this path forward. And I think I've touched on these issues with you before, because there's been a lot of talk about diverting these new funds coming in from the capital gains tax, which the Supreme Court recently upheld here in our state. Get those monies going into the education system. I guess I'm trying to figure out, what model do you see moving forward such that our principals, our school districts can have a sustainable and reliable source of income going into the future, just so they know even where to plan? Because right now, I think that's a bit of a moving target for them.
Well, you mentioned the capital gains tax, and I personally, and Children's Alliance as an organization, worked really hard to defend that tax when it was put in place, because it, taxes less than 0.1% of all Washingtonians, and we were thinking it was going to drive about $400 million a year into the early learning sector and the K-12 sector. And we now know that it has already raised about $850 million, with the idea that there will be another deposit into it, so that it will raise, easily over $1.5 billion that are going into the K-12 and early learning sectors, which is huge. It could be a game changer for a lot of the issues that we're talking about.
I did want to ask you, though, Stefan, when it comes to that capital gains tax, the critique I've heard from some folks is that it's too volatile. Let's say it's a down market year or whatever else. We won't be able to predict the amount of dollars that might come in, and that might be an issue too. Help us with that part. Do you have a concern about that piece, I guess, when it comes to capital gains?
Well, I think it would be incumbent on school board directors and the state government to try to figure out ways to moderate that up and down volatility of it. Because it is, in essence, it depends on sales of property and sales of capital. And so it could have that volatility kind of built into it. But I would much rather have $1.5 million or $1 billion in 1 year, and then have, half that amount or less than half that amount in the following year. Yeah. I'd much rather have that than not have anything at all.
That's fair. I think there's still a discussion ahead on that one in terms of where those dollars go and how sustainable and a revenue source that would be. All right, well, up next, folks, we're going to talk about a groundbreaking new book about the U.S. system of taxation, how it impoverishes people of color. Stefan had a very recent chat with author Dr. Dorothy Brown about this. We're going to break it down on Now Hear This. Well, Dr. Dorothy Brown thought by becoming a tax lawyer, she would get away from discussions of race and racism, which were a huge part of her life growing up in the South Bronx. But when she started doing her parents' tax returns, dad's a plumber, mom's a nurse, she found out they were paying an unusually high amount of taxes, and she was working to find out why. What came out of that search for answers was a book, The Whiteness of Wealth, published in 2022, that has led to some startling discoveries about the IRS, which does not collect information about race and ethnicity on our tax returns. But after this book came out, studies have found that by imputing race into that tax information, using last names, geographic data, some very challenging lessons are rising to the surface, like this.
If you applied for the Earned Income Tax Credit and you were Black, you were 3 to 5 times more likely to be audited than if you were non-Black. 3 to 5 times. How bad is that? Really bad.
Well, Dr. Brown spoke with Stefan at the Children's Alliance annual lunch in June. I helped MC the event. Thank you very much, and had a front row seat, which was excellent. Stefan, this detail about Black people being audited was just one of the aha moments for me during this presentation and your discussion with Dr. Brown. What stood out to you?
It was a fabulous opportunity. I'm a fanboy of Dr. Brown and all that she has done to really illuminate the structural obstacles to people of color, and particularly the Black community, from being able to function in society. We were thrilled to have her speak, and the feedback that we've gotten from the audience was they were just blown away by what she had to share.
Yeah. Was there a lesson that jumped out at you of what she was saying? I know that potential of being audited more often was really something. Was there anything else about what she was talking about, or something from the book maybe that jumps out at you?
Well, there were aspects of it that were all too familiar, and I would imagine that many of the Black folks who were in the audience, we're like, yeah, we know that. But it's good to have this
Experience that, yeah.
but we know that is the case. I was really taken by the fact that she talked about Seattle, Washington's relationship to this, in
yes.
that we were able, a law firm, which will go unnamed, but is one of the more prominent firms in Seattle, actually helped to encode into U.S. law a loophole so that wealthy people could get out of paying their taxes by filing jointly rather than filing separately.
There we go.
It was profound to think about Seattle's role in that situation.
Yeah. I thought so too. And there was that really interesting breakdown of, and I think this was the case with her parents. There are two earners there that are making, let's say, $50,000 apiece. Okay, you got that two earner family over there, but then you've got this one earner family over here that's making $100,000, right? And in the eyes of the IRS, okay, they're just the same, but they're truly not. When you think about that higher earner, that $100,000 family, the one earner there, that is a salary and a job that probably is coming with some tax-free benefits like retirement, things like that. For those $50,000 earners, two of them together, they're most likely not getting a lot of those benefits. That's one piece of it. Then you throw on the fact that childcare, well, if you've got a spouse at home, that there's a benefit for that $100,000 earner that the two earners probably don't have. It was amazing to me to watch that stack up and say, oh, yeah, that $100,000 does not equal $100,000. That was something that blew me away, too.
Yeah, the other part of it that I think is really important to bring up there is if you look at marriage patterns, it is very unlikely that a Black family is going to have one wage earner and the other one be a stay-at-home mom. And so by putting those data together, and she did a masterful job, because the IRS doesn't collect data by race. She did a masterful job of finding proxies that you could use to insert into the data that shows these disparate impacts that people of color face.
Yeah. And I guess, I think this is a question that she has wrestled with, but it's starting to change, it feels like, at the federal level. Why does the IRS get to be an outlier for our national government when it comes to not gathering data about race and ethnicity? Because so many other agencies do that. Yeah. It sounds like it might be changing with the IRS, this new commissioner coming in March, Danny Werfel there. It helped me out with this thought, because this is a really interesting twist to what the IRS is all about. Trying to be colorblind, it might actually be having some bad repercussions.
Right. I think she would say, if she were a part of this, that it's intentional, that there is intention and focus on not collecting data to allow the disparities to exist, to continue to exist. She makes that point very eloquently in the book, to say there is intention and focus on trying to keep this hidden so that people don't argue for change to happen.
Wow. And just so amazing to think about when our income tax system, at least, was put into place in 1913, I think it was. It was first wealthy white people who were taxed. But then as the tax rolls started to extend to other people, and maybe they weren't necessarily getting all the benefits that those income tax dollars should allow for, I think it's been very interesting to see the expansion of that tax system, and then the protection for people at the very top of it who are making the most. That's another great observation from this book as well.
And I think she makes a really good point that the reason that the tax system, when it was created, was very progressive in nature is because most of us couldn't afford to pay taxes. And over time, we've allowed these loopholes to exist for wealthy people that has made the nature of the taxing system a lot less progressive. And if you ask the average person on the street, or you did some polling, I think most people would support the idea that the U.S. taxing structure should be progressive. Those who have the most should pay more in taxes than those who don't have very much income. And so it is very strange how we have moved away from that as a concept. And she would argue that we need to move back towards that progressivity.
I would say so, too. And I remember at the end of this discussion, you asked Dr. Brown if she was hopeful about the future of this issue. And I know there's a lot of different ways to read that, but it sounded like she was hopeful, and she was trying to pass that hope along to her students as she continues to teach. But do you have some thoughts about that, race in our tax system, and where this is going?
Well, the way I remember her saying that was she said, I think that people of color should become defensive. Like they should learn how to play the game so that they can take care of their families and hopefully confer some wealth onto their children, right?
Mm-hmm.
That being naive and thinking that my white friend has the same kind of tax implications that I do is a mistake. And so she was encouraging all people to continue to challenge, and in particular, the white folks that were in the audience. She was asking them to be allies, but she was asking those of us of color to get smart and become defensive. Think about the implications of all the purchases that you make and the income that you raise and the house that you buy, the cars that you buy, and the neighborhood you live in. All of those have implications on your taxes.
Wow. A lot to unpack here. And folks, please, The Whiteness of Wealth is an excellent book by Dr. Dorothy Brown. I'm really glad I was able to see that discussion with you, Stefan, and I'm looking forward to hearing more discussions for Children's Alliance in the future on those issues as well. All right, well, coming up, where does the state of Washington rank when it comes to supporting our kids, from education to childcare to overall health? Some interesting results from a new study released on those numbers. We're taking a look at it coming up on our segment, What's Next? Stefan, I wanted to ask you about the annual Kids Count data book recently released by the Annie E. Casey Foundation. It found out that overall well-being for our kids, well, our state's 16th overall. This is looking at economic well-being, education, health, and family and community data points. Overall, it sounds like Washington is doing okay, but you took a deeper look inside of these numbers, especially when it comes to child care. What's going on? Because you had mentioned something about child care deserts that I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, when I came into this position about 3 years ago, we commissioned a survey of child care providers across the state. And the top line response back that we got to that survey was that about 45% of child care providers expected that they would have to close their doors in the next year. It was during the middle of the pandemic. A lot was going on. There wasn't enough income or revenue for many of these businesses. And so a lot of them were scheduled to close. We advocated for the Fair Start for Kids bill that was passed in 2021, and it drove about $1 billion into the child care sector, making it easier for parents to pay for care, low-income parents, low and middle-income parents to pay for care, and also supported those existing child care sectors. But we still have large segments of the state where there's only one provider and hundreds of kids in that area. And so lots of kids don't have access to child care at all. And then, of course, you want to have access to high quality child care. And so that's even more rare for many families across the state.
And when you talk about high quality of care, I know that we're talking about trying to command some good salaries for people who are serving as child care providers here. And I think that you did some research on this as well. There are a number of child care providers out there who are women of color, and they flat out don't make as much as their white peers. I think that's a piece of this as well.
Yeah. So you would think, if you understand the brain science that is evolving, you would think that child care providers would earn a middle-class salary because they're doing some of the most important work. While parents and families are out at work, they are actually providing a lot of tools and skills that kids need before they enter kindergarten. But if you look at the data, you would know that child care providers in Washington state, that's the third lowest paid profession in Washington state. There are only two jobs that you can have in Washington state that pay a lower salary than child care providers. And this is overwhelmingly a population of women of color that provide that care. And many of them can't afford to provide that care and take care of their own families. And so we're trying to advocate for an increase in overall salaries so that it is worthwhile for a person to stay in the profession and do what they love to do, which is take care of other people's children.
Wow. And just branching off from the data book for a second here as we start to wrap up here, I wanted to ask you about a recent piece of work that Children's Alliance has been getting together here when it comes to children's mental health. Such a focus during the COVID pandemic, and I think afterwards as well. I just wanted to figure out a little bit more about what Children's Alliance is looking into there. What are you learning, and what are you trying to do to help?
Well, a big part of our theory of action is that we reach out to communities and try to understand what are the issues that the children and families in those communities are facing. The number one issue in our kind of outreach to communities is youth mental health. More kids are reporting depression and anxiety, and it's all across the state. In every part of the state, the numbers are really high. When we compare against other states, we see that Washington State is doing really poorly. Part of the reason for that is we don't have enough providers who can provide care for children who are suffering, and those providers are not distributed where the need is. There's a lot more in the Puget Sound area, a lot fewer on the east side of the state. And the most troubling statistic that we saw is that if you had 100 kids who all indicated that they were suffering from behavioral, emotional, mental health, reporting depression or anxiety, if you had 100 kids in a room, all of them reporting that, only 20 of them would actually be able to get care. And as we know from watching, news reports, there's a lot of bad outcomes that come when kids don't get care. The teachers that I talk to, the principals and superintendents that I talk to across the state, they're reporting that schools are much more difficult to run post-pandemic than they were even a few years ago because of the number of children that are showing up every single day with untreated behavioral, emotional, mental health issues.
Wow. I'm very interested to learn more about that study, Stefan, and I really appreciate you bringing that up and what Children's Alliance has done here. One very last thing to wrap up with you here. Little Birdie told me that you were planning a very long bike ride down to Portland, I believe, very, very soon here. There are perfectly fine buses and trains that go there. You're aware of that, right?
I do. I guess I like a challenge, but 2-day bike ride. I didn't know you knew about
STP.
that. Yes.
Have you done it before?
No, I'm
Wow.
looking forward to it.
Are you feeling ready for it, I guess?
Little scared.
You just head right south. I think that's all you need to do, and you'll be on your way in no time.
Up and down those hills.
One day or 2 day. Are you gonna split it up into 2 days?
2 days. Yep. Yeah.
Go get it.
I have much honor for those who are going to do it in 1 day, but that's not me.
Okay, you're just crazy enough to make it happen. Well, I can't wait to see how that fares for you, my friend. Thank you very much, Stefan Blandford, for being on with me on Seattle News, Views, and Brews.
My pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Stefan. Thanks to everybody listening to this Patrons First podcast of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics and education, too. This podcast is on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon so you can access shows like this first and, of course, show your support. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.